And we're live.
All right. So, if you've seen round ceramics, it's likely that they were made on this, which is called a potter's wheel. And this is a machine that basically just spins. And so it allows us to move the clay in a circular motion instead of pinching, turning, pinching, turning, pinching, turning. Moves it for us. And it makes it a lot easier to make smooth forms, or you can alter them and make them funky. So this is a bat. It's something that we put on top of the potter's wheel so that we can lift up our pieces very easily. Because if I were to lift up that piece without a bat, it would squish. So now I'll start with a ball of clay. I think this one is a little small for what we're doing, so I'm going to cut off a bigger piece using the wire. You want to take it, mash it up into a round shape, about equal. And if you mash it up like I just did, you'll either want to wedge it on the table to squish out the air bubbles, or I'll show you a way to wedge it on the wheel. So you slam it in the middle of the board. And you try to get it as centered as you can. And so at first, you go slow, and you mush it into the middle so it looks about even, so you can see it's wobbling back and forth, and that's something that we don't want. Because if we were to pull that up, it would be super crooked like that. Sometimes it's easier to do it with water so that your hand doesn't stick. So once it's about centered, so I can put my hand on it and it doesn't push me around too much, I want to speed it up to about as fast as the wheel can go. And get my sponge full of water, and then I'm going to use the side of my hand and the palm of this hand to press in on the clay. So it does fight back, and so you saw that it peeled off a little bit of clay on my hand, but I just scoop that off and keep going. Sometimes it'll have like a little tail around here, so you want to cut that off so as much of the clay is in the workable lump right here. And so you could keep going like this, but it's going to be more off-center than you think. And so you can see it sort of dancing back and forth, and that's what we don't want. We want it to be as even as possible. And so you anchor, if you're sitting, you can anchor on your knees, but I'm standing, so I anchor it on my hips and on the rim of the wheel. And you can see I'm braced so that the majority of my body weight is pushing against the clay. So this clay is pretty soft, and so it's not as much of an issue, but it's still good to be ready to fight the clay. And so once it's near center, you want to lift off slowly so that you don't push the clay around. Because if you lift off quickly, it starts dancing again. So you want to be patient with the clay, because if you think about it, when it's not spinning, you're touching it like that. It's just doing that in a circular fashion. So just because the wheel is moving, it doesn't mean that you're not influencing the clay every single time you touch it. And so what I just did, touching it when it was not spinning, you don't want to do that ever. Because, like you saw, I only pushed it a little bit, but now it's way off center. So center it again. And so I told you I was going to show you how to wedge it while on the wheel. And so what I'll do is I'll push up into a cone. And this doesn't necessarily need to be as centered because I'm going to push it right back down. And what this does is it gets the clay particles aligned so that they're more willing to pull all the way up. So I'm going to do that a couple of times. Cone. And then back down into a puck shape. And I sort of use the sponge in my top hand as a reservoir of water so that I don't get dry, because if it gets dry, the clay starts pulling and it'll pull itself off center. The clay does not want to be in the middle of the wheel. Alright, and now the clay has been centered and it's ready to start pulling and opening it up. Is there any shape that you have in mind for making? Because I can make a bowl, I can make a cup, I can make a vase, sort of. A bowl?
Yeah.
Okay. So for a bowl, well, for all forms, you want to use your thumb, or I like using my pointer finger and then bracing it with my other hand and pushing down to where the bottom will be, which is, let's say, about that far from the base of the wheel. And so I grab the clay, holding it like this so I can recenter. Because if you do that too aggressively, it will throw the clay off center. So I brace it, and now I'm going to start pulling the walls up. So what I'm doing is I have my fingers on the inside, 2 fingers on the inside, and then I use this one as sort of a hook to pull the outside of the wall. And I go slowly. They say ideally you would be doing this in no more than 3 pulls up, but I've never been able to do that. And so once after each pull that you do, you want to take your finger and pinch down the lip of the pot to even it out and sort of reinforce that layer of clay. Because if you pull really aggressively at the top but not as much at the bottom, you'll have a really thin lip. So you want to sort of even that back out with the rest of the clay that you've done. And then I make that hook shape again and I pull it out. So this can be daunting, but it's those clay particles that I said that are just sheathing off. And so those have aligned, and my finger dug into them the right way and they decided to pull off. But I still have a good chunk of clay here. So as long as you don't freak out about that, it will be fine. And so a lot of this is just patience and like learning to understand what the clay is telling you. And so, because I'm making a bowl, I'm pulling out instead of straight up. And I'll be taking some of the clay that's still left on the bottom and pulling out. And so at this point, I've realized that my wheel is going too fast. So we use this knob to slow it down a little bit. Because as the clay gets thinner, it wants to fall out of the wheel, and the centrifugal force of the wheel will pull it out. And so if we want a little bit more control, we have to go slower. So I pull it all the way up to the top. And now my clay is at a thickness that I want. And I'll be finishing it up. I have extra clay down at the bottom, and usually I will trim that off. So once it's beyond leather hard, so almost completely dry, I will flip it over and then use a ribbon tool to cut off the excess clay. So we want to do as much shaping here as we can, but there is more that we can take off later. But right now, I'll use this tool, which in my department we call it a bob. If you want to get fancy about it, it's a wooden rib. So I'll take this and cut off a little bit of that bottom so that we can get our wire tool under there and make it more of a pretty foot if I choose not to trim it. Then I will use this tool, which you would recognize as Panera gift card. But they're really handy when using clay. So I'm going to slow the wheel down more and use it to smooth out the outside. So for this, I'm pressing only as lightly as I need to get it to contact with the gift card and sort of scraping off the slip that's built out on the outside. And then smoothing out that lip again. I'm gonna use the credit card to shape it a little bit more because it pushed it off center. Now this is definitely thinner than you guys will want to aim for, because if I make one wrong move, it's going to just collapse. So I have about 7 years of ceramics under my belt. So I wouldn't say that you guys are going to be making anything like this. About 5 of that I spent making what we call hurricane wear, because the bottom is so heavy that it will stay upright in a hurricane. And so I have a lot of work going into this. And so with that, I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to clean off my hands. So if you come up to it when it's still spinning like this, you can see that it has started collapsing, and I'm just going to leave it like that. If I try to mess with it anymore and try to fix it, it will collapse.
Yeah, I've collapsed quite a few.
That's good shape for a boulder.
I can't even center. Real talk. Yeah, it's hard.
Alright, once my hands are dry, I'll run the wire tool under it 2 or 3 times while the wheel is spinning, just to make sure that we can get it up off the bat once it's dry. And then you're done.
Nice.
That's cool. That is
Yeah.
super cool. Yep. So that is art in real life.
Thank you very much for doing that for
You
us.
made that look easy. That is hard to do.
Like I said, 7 years.
Yeah. All right. So